Hey.
Test.
Hey guys, I'm Michael Parenti. I've been here for a little bit.
This is our special segment called Ask Heffelfinger. But in all reality, we are very gracious for your time to come here and answer some of our silly and hopefully serious questions. But Jim is the Wildlife Science Coordinator for Arizona Game and Fish, amongst also being the chairman for the Western Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies Mule Deer Working Group. I had to read it a little bit to get that full title.
Yeah, I know.
It's a good one. It's a good one. But the Mule Deer Working Group, that's a big thing. It's like,
We've done a lot of cool stuff.
how many different agencies is that?
24 western states, Canadian provinces, and territories. Northwest Territories was just added.
Yeah,
But they've had 2 mule deer sightings in the last couple decades, so they're not a big player.
dang. But Jim's also a research scientist for University of Arizona, amongst author for how many papers, books?
I like to write.
A
I
few.
just added that up, 29 book chapters.
Nice.
Yep.
He's
And-
an author.
Author. But yeah, basically, Jim is an insanely knowledgeable guy about all things, especially deer biology.
Let's not overplay it, because I won't know the answers to the first 10 questions then.
But that's why, we have some really thought-provoking, like, very serious questions, such as the first question, which is, why do fawns have spots?
Nature's camouflage. Same reason jaguars have spots. So it's just that dappled light on the forest floor in most cases where they're dropped, and you've got that breaking up their pattern like all of the camouflage companies have been trying to catch up with for all these years.
So it's camouflage.
Why
It's
do
camouflage.
they lose their spots then?
Yeah, good point. Wouldn't you want to still stay hidden from predators?
Because axis deer, right? They keep their spots.
Yeah, that's true. Yep.
But then why does the mule deer
And
white
some
tail
fallow
lose it?
deer. And some adult whitetails have actually kept their spots through a couple of years. Kind of an unusual situation. But fawns, before they're too mobile, they need the camouflage and they need the scent-free condition that they've got, just to keep them away from predators. Once they can run, then they can do a pretty good job of running from coyotes.
Why is there a reason why deer run in front of cars and they freeze? Like, is there something going on in their brain? Are they attracted to light?
Yeah.
It's kind of a silly question, but like in all seriousness, like, is there something going on in their brain when
Yeah.
they see light?
No, it's just if you think about it, and they run out on the highway, they don't see a car coming at them anymore. They don't see this big thing coming at them. All they see is these bright lights, and may not recognize that those headlights are actually getting farther and farther apart as they get closer to them. But they don't recognize it as something moving at them. They just recognize this bright light, and so they just freeze and try to figure out what it is, and then they get smacked.
All right, so I was just reading something here, and it says that some deer practice both monogamy and polygamy. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Kind of like a moral? Like a
Not a moral thing, but but no, like I'm interested to know. I mean, have you seen where some species or some deer in different areas are more monogamous versus?
Yeah, not really.
Polygamous?
The deer family as a whole is polygamous. So there's a male that services a whole bunch of females, and that's a good thing. That actually allows us to harvest males and not affect the number of fawns that hit the ground the next year, because you still got a couple dominant males breeding all of the females and all the females getting bred. And that was at the heart of our wildlife conservation, where we needed to do something to stop killing the females, stop depressing the deer population. Too many deer were getting killed, and the first thing we did was buck-only laws, where you can't kill the females, you can kill only the bucks, and that still allows that reproduction. But there's no species of deer in the Cervidae family that pair up for life, or you just got a male and a female. They're all that polygamous system. That's just what evolved in a lot of those hoofed animals.
Okay. So, when you're speaking male, female, why is sometimes it a buck versus stag, doe, hind, or if you get into the elk species, bull, cow? Is there a reason for this naming system?
Oh boy, that's a good question. No, all of those words just kind of come through old-time use. Like even the word elk that we have is just a misnomer. We don't have elk. The wapiti. that came from Europe, and the Europeans they called their moose elk, ELCH in Europe. And so they came over here and they saw our wapiti, and they said, those are elk. But they're really kind of referring to, like, it was the closest thing they could think of, was like the moose they had. And so the species names like that just come through historical use. And so we have bucks and we have stags for Old World and New World, and that's usually how it breaks out. But then we've got bulls for wapiti. And so I don't know if there's a rhyme and reason. There's certainly no structure where people decided this is what we're going to use. They just, through common usage, that's what became what people use.
So I tie flies and I use deer hair quite a bit, and I've noticed that there's difference between like deer belly hair and like the finer. There's like some finer, we call it like spinning hair for like building heads and stuff. What is the reason why there's like thicker? Do you know? Is there a reason why there's like thicker hair on, and like we use the guard hair, so like I'm not talking about the fur and all that stuff. Is there a reason why there's thicker guard hairs on like the bottom as opposed to like wherever? I don't even know where that thinner stuff comes from.
Yeah, actually, as far as hair density, it's usually thinner on the undersides. That's where they lose more heat. And then on the upper side, you've got, especially the winter coat, those guard hairs are hollow, big hollow hair shafts. So they're just insulators. They hold air in there so they can lay flat and they can trap air in between the hairs, and they can actually have insulative hair or air in between the hair shaft itself like that. But then they just evolve with tougher hair on the outside where they're going to get most injuries and assaults and rain and snow and everything, and then softer hair on the underside. And that's what you see there.
So deer have eyes on the side of their head because obviously they're a prey species. Do you know how wide their vision angles are? And are different deer species have different, like, I guess, like able to see more?
Yeah, I think among the deer species, they're pretty similar in how much of a radius they can see. And if you think of 360 degrees, they say that deer have somewhere around 320, 330 degrees that they can see around. So you think about a deer cannot move his head and see almost 360 degrees, and then all it has to do is move its head a little bit and it sees the missing part. So you think about that when you're stalking up to an animal and all it has to do is move its head a little bit and you can see 360 degrees. But we say there's a little thing that we recite talking about the angle of the eyes and where the eye sockets are. And we say eyes on the side, animal hides, eyes in front, animal hunts. Because predators have these front-facing eyes, and that aids them in binocular vision. And that binocular vision tells them right where that prey species is in space through depth perception. And if you have the eyes on the side of your head, you don't have depth perception, but you have the advantage of being able to see those predators sneaking up on you in that whole direction. Plus, if you're eating plants, the plants are right there on the ground. You don't really need to zero in and have that depth perception of exactly where it is. So you can do that. But then you think about pronghorn, and they've got that high eye socket sitting on the side. So when you get into a different species like pronghorn, then you have a different kind of radius that you're able to see. But within the deer species, they're all shaped pretty similar.
Okay. So while I'm on that question, talking about deer's eyes, I mean, I don't know if it's an old wives' tale or whatever, but like obviously the whole black and white with deer versus like seeing color and everything. What's the reasoning for that, if you have an idea?
Yeah, they can see, deer can see color.
Okay.
They just can't see the whole spectrum that we can see. So they can see somewhat in the ultraviolet that we can't see. And then they can see the violets and the blues and the greens and the yellows. And it just starts getting into the oranges a little bit is where their sensitivity runs out. And they can look at that. They can look at rods and cones in the retina, and they can see what those rods and cones respond to when they use different colors. And so they've determined that they can see color. It's not all black and white, but what they see is probably yellowish and bluish combination that they can see. And that's why hunter orange, you can use hunter orange with that, where you can't so much with the bird species like turkey hunting, because they can see color. And birds are eating red berries, and it would be an advantage to be able to see red if you were a bird. So you can pluck red berries and some of the fruits and some of the things that you eat, whereas deer are mostly eating green stuff. And so it's well within that band of blue and green and yellow. But they can see some color.
So geographically speaking, moving from west to east, what? This is a very serious question. So geographically speaking, moving from west to east, at what point does a 5x5 whitetail become a 10-pointer?
Yes. That's a good question because it's not really a species thing. People talk about mule deer being 4x4 or 4-point.
Right.
And the eastern count is you count all of the points, including the brow tines on whitetail. But our cow's whitetail and whitetails in the west, still people talk about western count, especially with our cow's whitetails. And western count to easterners is confusing because if you're not good at math with converting eastern count to western count, you've got to divide by 2 and then subtract 1 for the brow tine.
Right.
And so
Yeah.
so it's kind of goofy, but where that is probably somewhere right around the Mississippi River, I would guess, is where that kind of lexicon changes there. But it's pretty funny to have people come out and talk about 10-point mule deer and things like that.
Oh yeah, yeah. Well, then it's like, yeah, brow tine. Because from my perception, it's like, whitetails, we do count the brow tines.
Yeah.
For our western count, but mule deer you do not.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
So it's like a 5x5 whitetails. That's count, with the brow tines.
And that's with the brow tines. It's not that way with cow's whitetail.
Oh, really? So
Yeah,
you call
if you've got
if a nice
Yeah.
4-point is 5-point with counting the brow tines.
Yeah,
Gotcha.
yeah. And so usually you hear a lot of people talking about 3-point cow's whitetail, and they're not counting the brow tines. That's an 8-point eastern count.
Gotcha.
A 3-point western count. So that's why I say you divide by 2 and you get 4, and then you subtract 1 and you get 3. So it's like a lot of math involved to do the conversion.
It's kind of a funny cultural thing that happens.
It is.
Kind of. So speaking of that, and going with the whole geographic thing, when does it become brow tines to eye guards?
I think that's a mixture, because in Texas they're called dog catchers.
Dog catchers.
Dog catchers. That's what they catch the dog with. So I don't know if that's geography or not, because I hear it all.
Well, my question is actually about brow tines. And so why, generally speaking, do whitetails have brow tines and mule deer, generally speaking, don't? I have one right here that has 2 little nubbins. Is it an evolution thing, or is it just like, is there a reason behind it?
There probably is an evolutionary reason, and I have no clue.
Yeah. Well, then my second question is,
Because that is interesting. 'Cause
my theory is, like, I know mule deer do fight. Like, I've seen pictures and photos. I've never seen one, like, really going at it. Is there one species that's more, like, vicious and, like, and violent?
Yeah, I don't think so, because most of the antler fighting is not fight to the death, try to injure. When usually you get an animal that's a little bit bigger than the other one, and it's more of like an arm wrestling match to see who's tougher.
Yeah.
See where they are in the pecking order. And they'll come together, and they're not like bighorn sheep where they clash their antlers. They'll usually come together and like one buck will offer an antler to the other one, and they'll place them together, not like a ramming action, but it's more of a wrestling match. And they do this, and they shove, and they kind of find out who's tougher. And a lot of that has to do with body size and aggression, just even personality, and who wins that fight. And then they know who the winner is. It's only when you get 2 bucks that are really evenly matched, especially big mature bucks, evenly matched, and neither one of them backs down, they can really get into it, and they can really have some violent fights. But those are much less common than normal kind of sparring matches to work out the pecking order.
Is there any correlation between antler size and reproductive organs?
No. I've researched that extensively.
Why did the deer go to the dentist?
Why do they go to the dentist?
Yeah.
Usually, they're eating a lot of wood, and they're getting some of that stuff packed in there.
Oh, it's because they have
So-
buck teeth.
Buck teeth. Okay. I thought I heard all the deer jokes, but I got a new one.
All right. So quick question: what's your favorite movie?
Favorite movie? It's not The Deer Hunter. For sure, that one. Probably Reindeer. How's that good for an answer? Yeah. Jim Bachtel. That was pretty, yeah.
Okay.
That got me jacked up for going up
You
there.
were part of that one. You know?
Yep.
Yeah, he was pandering to his audience.
I know. I was surprised. Like I was thinking it was gonna be like a major motion picture.
So Jim, is there a reason why deer? Well, so all these different ungulates have different scat. Is there a reason why deer is smaller and like more compact into little little turds?
Yeah.
Like, what's the reasoning why they're just tiny little turds? Like,
Tiny little
instead of
pellets.
a long tube like
I think when you
bear
can,
may or whatever.
yeah, if you compare elk pellets
Yeah.
and you compare deer pellets,
Is there a scientific reason? Is this just the way it breaks down in the body, I guess?
I think it's more the elk have a bigger bunghole, and so you have bigger pellets.
Gotcha.
And deer have a smaller bunghole, and then they have smaller pellets. I think that's pretty much what it's like.
All right. On a slightly more serious note, chronic wasting disease is becoming very talked about in our space as hunters and anyone who's interested in deer populations. What does the landscape look like in the United States right now with chronic wasting disease? Like it,
Yep.
kind of how much, because we keep finding it in new states. Montana now has it. It's just seems like it's spreading. So where are we at right now?
Yep, it's definitely spreading for sure. I mean, we started with these little clusters and then we're sampling and monitoring, and it's just continuing to grow. It's continuing to grow in geographic scope. It's continuing to grow in prevalence rate, which is a percent of the animals in the population that are testing positive. And Idaho just a couple weeks ago became the 27th state to join the CWD club. And it was interesting about Idaho is detected on the west side of the state, whereas west of them, there isn't any detected positives yet. And it was they were sampling intensively in the northern part of Idaho, on the eastern edge of Idaho, specifically because Utah and Montana and Wyoming, and they figured that's where it would come from. It shows up on the west side of the state. And I think that's a precautionary tale to hunters that this stuff can show up really anywhere. It's not always gonna progress in the same way. So that then has engaged them more intensive sampling to find out just what they have and where it is and that sort of thing. But CWD just keeps growing. It's not going to go away. It's just going to be something that we're going to have to live with.
You hear EHD and you hear blue tongue like fairly frequently. People will be like, "Oh, there was a big EHD death or blue tongue or whatever." So what are those diseases, and are they the same thing? Are they caused by the same thing, or different in different areas, different issues?
Yeah, EHD and blue tongue are different diseases,
Okay.
but they're closely related. They're hemorrhagic diseases. Blue tongue seems to be a thing of pronghorn antelope and sheep, and EHD seems to be more deer and cattle related. But there's two different kinds of EHD, two different serotypes they call it, and then there's about 7, might be more than that, different serotypes of blue tongue. And so when a population, there's kind of an EHD outbreak, most of the animals survive it. You can have some years with a really high mortality in the population, but probably the rest of the population has contracted the virus and has survived it because they'll get antibody levels that will come up and they'll protect them the next year. So you rarely get, at least not the same serotype, you won't get EHD outbreaks in consecutive years because the second year, everybody still living has antibodies and they're immune to it. And so it's something that flares up once in a while. But they're different. They cause hemorrhaging in all of their tissues, internal tissues everywhere. The blood vessels kind of break down. It seems to be EHD has always been more of an issue in the southern states, and now we're seeing it in the Great Plains and some of the northern areas. We're seeing more of that, and it could be just drier summers and some of the changes in climate that we're seeing it farther north.
I don't know if you touched on this, but is it like I've always heard that it's deer are more likely to get it if they're like using the same water source, or they're like it's usually on, like, I've always heard that it's always, or not always, but usually on a drought year where there's like limited water sources.
Yep.
And then they're, around each other.
Yeah, but
is that true, or is it generalization?
They're always found near water, and part of that is them getting viremic, getting the virus and having a fever and spending more time around water and drinking more. But it definitely is something that flares up in drought years, and part of that is the deer are in worse conditions, so they're more susceptible to any kind of disease, but also they're more concentrated water sources, and they're not getting it from drinking the water, but the deer are hanging around water, and then those midges that bite and spread it from deer to deer are around water too, because they need to be around water. And so you've kind of got perfect storm. You've got deer in bad conditions, you get an EHD that flares up that year, and you've got all the disease vectors that are spreading it, and all of the hosts, the deer, hanging around the water sources in poor condition. So you get those big flare-ups.
And then they usually go to water to die,
And they do die near water. And that's part, I think, because when they're really sick and really feverish, they're hanging around water and drinking and just to
And
make them feel better.
It's a midge fly, or is
It's
it
a
like
no-seam. It's
okay.
a no-seam. It's a tiny little gnat.
Okay.
So are deer responsible for the mass spread of COVID throughout the United States? That's what I've been hearing in the headlines. No, I'm just kidding. But I mean, yeah. So do deer have COVID?
Yeah, there's been a lot of news reports talking about deer having COVID. It's mostly eastern whitetail. Deer have not been documented to actually have the COVID disease. So one thing that's a little confusing is that there's the SARS-CoV-2 virus that causes COVID-19. So the SARS is the virus and the COVID-19 is the disease. So deer have been found, white-tailed deer in eastern states have been found to have elevated antibodies showing that they were exposed to the SARS-CoV-2 virus. But deer have not shown up with any COVID-19 symptoms. So technically it's not true that deer have had COVID-19. They haven't had the clinical signs of the disease, but it's pretty unusual that they've been exposed to this virus. It shows they've been infected. Antibody levels have come up to protect them from that. And in some cases, 33 to 40% of the deer sample, 200 to 300 deer sampled in an area, 33 to 40% of the deer have elevated antibodies. They've been exposed to this. And because of the research they did, it's undeniable that they've been exposed from humans. They've caught it from humans. That's how they've been exposed to it. No one's really clear how that happened, but wastewater treatment water gets spread sometimes in fields, and they've found that the higher prevalence where they're finding more exposure to COVID is mostly the nearer they are to an urban area,
Gotcha.
the more they find that. So it's definitely deer that are close. If they're living in the backyard, eating out of your garbage or your garden or who knows, they're in closer contact with people. But they're not sick with COVID-19. No evidence that deer have passed or that there's any danger of deer passing the virus back to humans. And there's no danger. The CDC has said there's no concern about eating venison, cooking venison. You don't have to worry about any of that. There's some states that are recommending wearing masks when you're field dressing your deer. They say out of an abundance of caution.
Okay.
Some people think, and I think people shouldn't even be thinking about catching COVID-19 from their deer. Right. The CDC and the USDA are saying it's not a concern. It's not a human health hazard. And so I wouldn't be worried about that. But the reason some of the experts are worried is because if deer are exposed to this virus and they're carrying the viruses mutate all the time. And if they cross into another species like deer, they'll mutate a little bit. That's what viruses do. They'll change a little bit. The concern among disease people is that then it mutates enough to become different enough to be a little more dangerous if it does cross and spill back into humans. It hasn't happened, but that's the concern. And as an example, mink were another species that got that SARS-CoV-2 virus. And they documented that mink were infected for about 3 months. The virus, it mutated a little bit like it always does as it moves through a population in mink. And it mutated a little bit in mink. And only one person, a human that had COVID-19, they isolated the virus mutation that was in the mink population. So it was a case of it mutating in mink and then crossing back to one person. But that makes the disease people a little nervous. That's why they're concerned about it. So they're saying right now there's no issue with gutting your deer, there's no issue eating the meat, no issue being in contact with deer. But this is all pretty new stuff, so we'll see.
So if a deer breaks its tail, where should it go to get it fixed?
The tailor?
Oh, dude, that's not a bad one.
I was gonna say a retail shop.
I have no further questions, thank you.
No further questions, Your Honor.
Well, I feel pretty satisfied. We really appreciate your time on answering some of our silly questions and slightly more serious questions, but it was great having you.
I don't mind talking about deer.
Yeah. Sweet. Anything else? You guys good?
Yeah, I'm good.
All right. Well, thanks for being here.
Yeah, thanks, Jim.